What if you spent $750 million on a state-of-the-art skyscraper, only to realize that the very wind it was designed to withstand is slowly tearing it apart from the inside out? In Kansas City, a massive new architectural marvel was supposed to be a symbol of Midwestern resilience, a glass and steel giant capable of staring down the most violent weather on the planet. But something has gone horribly wrong. Residents and office workers have started reporting terrifying sounds coming from the walls, a deep metallic groaning that echoes through the corridors during the region's famous storms. Now engineers have discovered visible fractures snaking through the building's core, a phenomenon known as tornado stress. But here is the most disturbing part. The developers, the city officials, and the lead architects have gone completely silent. They won't talk to the press, they won't release the safety reports, and they are allegedly forcing employees to sign non-disclosure agreements regarding the building's health. Today we are breaking that silence to investigate how a $750 million project failed to account for the physics of the heartland and why the people inside might be sitting on a structural time bomb. Kansas City sits right on the edge of Tornado Alley. This isn't a secret. Anyone who builds a birdhouse in Missouri knows you have to account for the wind. So, when a developer proposes a $750 million skyscraper, you expect the engineering to be world-class? You expect the best computer simulations that money can buy. The design for this tower was sleek, aerodynamic, and supposedly reinforced with a high-tension steel skeleton designed to flex and sway. But there is a massive difference between a gentle breeze and the localized, atmospheric pressure drops created by a passing supercell. The problem began with how the building handles the concept of vortex shedding. When wind hits a rectangular building, it creates swirls of air on the backside, like the wake behind a boat. These swirls can cause a building to vibrate at a certain frequency. If that frequency matches the natural frequency of the building's structure, you get resonance. It is the same principle that allows an opera singer to shatter a glass. In Kansas City, the engineers thought they had tuned the building to avoid this. But they were designing for standard wind loads, the kind of steady horizontal pressure you find in a textbook. They weren't prepared for the chaotic, multi-directional turbulence of a Midwestern storm season. As the building reached its final height, the cracks began to appear. These weren't just cosmetic cracks in the drywall. These were structural fissures in the concrete shear walls, the very spine that is supposed to keep the building upright. Ground-level tenants started noticing that the heavy glass doors in the lobby would suddenly jam or refuse to latch, a sign that the entire frame of the building was slightly out of square. High up on the 50th floor, workers reported that the sway during a thunderstorm was so extreme it was causing motion sickness. This shouldn't happen in a modern building of this caliber. When a skyscraper is hit by the extreme low pressure of a nearby tornado or a powerful downburst, the air inside the building actually tries to push its way out. It is like a giant lung being forced to expand. If the building isn't vented properly, or if the glass isn't designed to handle that specific pressure differential, the stress is transferred directly into the structural joints. In Kansas City, it appears the joints are losing the battle. The tornado stress being seen here is a combination of lateral wind force and this internal explosive pressure. The result is a series of microscopic failures in the welds and concrete bonds that add up to a major structural crisis. But why the silence? This is where the story turns into a corporate thriller. When you have $750 million on the line, the last thing you want is a public panic. If the building is declared unsafe, the property value drops to zero overnight. The insurance premiums skyrocket. The lawsuits from tenants and nearby property owners would be endless. So instead of being transparent, it seems the stakeholders have circled the wagons. Maintenance crews have been seen entering the building in the middle of the night with specialized epoxy injection equipment, trying to glue the cracks back together before anyone notices. The local government is in a difficult position as well. They provided massive tax breaks and public incentives to get this tower built. It was supposed to be the centerpiece of a downtown revitalization. If it fails, it is a political disaster. So, the building inspectors are being remarkably quiet. Public records requests for the latest structural surveys are being delayed or denied under the guise of trade secrets. It is a wall of silence meant to protect the investment, even if it ignores the reality of the physics. To understand the scale of the failure, we have to look at the materials. The tower used a new type of high-strength, lightweight concrete that was supposed to be the future of construction. It is easier to pump to high altitudes and dries faster. But recent studies in structural engineering suggest that this specific mix might be more brittle than traditional concrete. While it can handle a lot of weight pressing down on it, it doesn't handle the twisting or stretching of wind stress nearly as well. It is like the difference between a piece of chalk and a piece of rubber. The chalk is strong until you try to bend it, and then it snaps. Engineers who have looked at the leaked photos of the cracks are concerned about something called progressive failure. This is the nightmare scenario for any megaproject. It is when the failure of one small component puts extra stress on the next component, which then fails, leading to a chain reaction. If the core of the Kansas City skyscraper is losing its ability to stay rigid, the floors themselves could start to sag. This puts pressure on the exterior glass curtain wall. Eventually, the glass starts to pop out, falling hundreds of feet to the streets below. We have seen this happen in other cities, but never on a building that was supposedly tornado-proof. There is also the issue of the foundation. Kansas City isn't just known for wind. It has a very specific type of shale bedrock that can be slippery when wet. If the building is swaying more than intended, it is putting massive tow loads on the foundation. This means the weight of the building is shifting from side to side, essentially trying to rock the foundation out of the ground. If the anchoring bolts or the deep earth piers were designed for a more stable building, they could be experiencing fatigue. Metal fatigue is a silent hunter. It doesn't look like much until the moment the metal simply gives up. People who work in the building describe a ghostly atmosphere. On windy days, the elevator cables slap against the inside of the shafts, creating a rhythmic banging that can be heard throughout the floors. The automatic window shades move on their own as the building leans. Some employees have even started bringing levels to work, placing them on their desks only to find that the floor is slightly tilted one way in the morning and another way in the afternoon. It is a surreal environment where the inhabitants are the first to know the truth, while the people in charge continue to deny there is a problem. What happens if a real, direct-hit tornado actually strikes? The building was rated for an EF4, which is an incredibly powerful storm. But that rating assumes the building is in perfect condition. With the current cracking and structural stress, that rating is likely a fantasy. The building's ability to absorb energy is compromised. In a major storm, the damping systems, which are like giant shock absorbers at the top of the tower, might not be enough to counter the movement. If those dampers reach their limit, the building could enter a state of uncontrolled oscillation. The silence from the developers is especially frustrating for the local community because public money was used. When you take a $750 million gamble with the taxpayers' trust, you owe them an explanation when the walls start cracking. But the legal team behind the project is incredibly powerful. They have used every trick in the book to keep the structural data out of the public eye. They argue that revealing the flaws would compromise the security of the building, a vague term that is often used to hide embarrassing engineering mistakes. This project is a classic example of what happens when the desire for a signature building outpaces the reality of the environment. The architects wanted something thin and elegant, a pencil tower for the plains. But thin towers are inherently more susceptible to wind. To make it work, you have to use incredibly expensive and complex engineering. If you try to cut corners on a thin tower, the wind will find those shortcuts. It seems the wind in Kansas City has found every single one. One of the most concerning reports comes from a former maintenance worker who claimed that the expansion joints between the floors are already at their maximum capacity. These joints are designed to let the building breathe and move. If they are already maxed out, there is no room left for the building to flex during the next big storm. It is like a rubber band that has been stretched as far as it can go. Any more pressure and it simply snaps. The cost to fix a problem like this is astronomical. You can't just slap a bandage on a 50-story core. You might have to install external bracing, which would involve building a steel exoskeleton around the existing glass. This would completely change the look of the building and cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Or you could try internal reinforcement, which involves gutting large portions of the building to add more steel and concrete. This would displace the tenants and lead to a massive loss in rental income. Neither option is attractive, which is likely why the owners are choosing the third option, pretending it isn't happening in the hopes that the building eventually settles into a stable state. But towers don't usually settle out of structural cracks caused by atmospheric pressure. If anything, the problem will only get worse. Every time the building sways, the cracks grow a little bit more. Dust and moisture get into the cracks, causing the internal rebar to rust. As the iron rusts, it expands, which then pushes the concrete apart even further. It is a slow-motion degradation that is happening right in front of everyone's eyes, yet nobody in a position of power is willing to say the words. This situation highlights the flaws in the modern bidding and construction process for megaprojects. Often, the firm that gets the job is the one that promises the most spectacular design for the lowest price. This creates a natural incentive to use thinner materials, newer and less tested concrete mixes, and more aggressive timelines. When you are building in a high-risk environment like Tornado Alley, that efficiency can be a recipe for disaster. The people who live and work in the shadow of the skyscraper are also starting to get nervous. If the building has structural issues, it isn't just a threat to the people inside. A building this large has a massive debris field. In a catastrophic failure, the impact would be felt for blocks. The city's emergency management teams are reportedly running tabletop simulations for a high-rise failure, yet they still won't officially acknowledge that the $750 million tower is the reason for the sudden interest in those specific scenarios. The silence is starting to break, however, but only in the shadows of the internet. Forums for structural engineers and local architects are buzzing with leaked photos and theories. They point to the aspect ratio of the building, the relationship between its height and its width, as being fundamentally unsuitable for the wind speeds of the Missouri River Valley. They talk about aeroelastic galloping, a terrifying phenomenon where a building starts to move in a way that actually pulls more energy out of the wind, making the swaying worse and worse until the structure fails. If this building were to be declared a total loss, the insurance payout would be one of the largest in the history of American commercial real estate. But insurance companies don't like to pay out $750 million claims without a fight. They will hire their own investigators who will look at every single bolt, every weld, and every cubic yard of concrete. If they find that the developer or the architects ignored the warnings during the design phase, the lawsuits will last for decades. This is why the silence is so thick. Everyone is protecting their legal position, waiting for someone else to be the first to blink. As we look at the Kansas City skyscraper, we have to wonder about the future of high-rise construction in the Midwest. If a $750 million investment can't buy security against the wind, what does that mean for the next generation of designers? It suggests that we need a return to more conservative engineering. We need buildings that are shaped like the earth they stand on, not like the glass sculptures in an architect's dream. We need transparency in our public-private partnerships, where the safety of the citizens is more important than the pride of the developers. The tower still stands today, a shimmering, beautiful monument to modern design. But if you look closely at the upper floors during a blustery afternoon, you might see the slight, graceful arc of the swaying. Is it the normal movement of a healthy building, or is it the beginning of the end? The groaning sounds in the walls tell one story, the marketing brochures tell another. And while the owners refuse to talk, the wind continues to speak. It is a relentless, punishing dialogue between nature and architecture. For the students of failing megaprojects, this is a masterclass in risk management and corporate communication. It shows how the human desire to save face can often lead to a greater danger. By not addressing the cracks today, the developers are making a gamble that could eventually cost them everything. Money can buy a lot of things, but it can't buy a change in the laws of physics. Gravity and air pressure don't care about balanced sheets or non-disclosure agreements. The story in Kansas City is a reminder that our cities are evolving. We are building higher and thinner than ever before, using materials that push the boundaries of science. But we are also building in a world where the weather is becoming more extreme. The 100-year storm is happening every decade. If our buildings aren't ready for that change, we will see more of these $750 million ghosts. We will see more cracking from tornado stress and more high-powered lawyers trying to explain why a brand new building is falling apart. In the end, the truth will come out. It always does. Whether it is through a whistleblower, a leaked report, or a catastrophic failure, the silence will eventually be broken. Until then, the bridge between Kansas City's past and its future remains a shaky one. The skyscraper stands as a test of our collective ability to admit when we have made a mistake. It is easy to celebrate the ribbon cutting. It is much harder to admit that the ribbon was held together by a building that can't handle the breeze. Keep an eye on the Kansas City news cycle. If you see a sudden, quiet move to evacuate the building for renovations, or if you see a massive steel frame being built around the base, you will know the silence has finally shattered. Until then, we can only look up at the glass and steel and hope that the engineers were right, and the groaning in the walls is just the building's way of breathing. But in the back of everyone's mind is the same nagging question. If it was safe, why wouldn't they just say so? The $750 million silence continues for now, but in the heart of the country, where the wind never stays still for long, the pressure is building. The cracks are waiting. The steel is fatigue testing, and the city is watching. It is a high-stakes game of architectural poker, and the wind is about to call the bluff. When that happens, the people who refuse to talk might finally find they have a lot to say, but by then, it might be too late. The Kansas City skyscraper remains a beautiful, terrifying mystery, a giant made of glass that has learned the hard way that in Tornado Alley, the sky always has the last word.